What's up, fam? Welcome back to another chilling chapter. Before we dive into today's twisted mystery, Miss Marple and the Velvet Noose, hit me up. What made you smile today? And where in the world are you listening from? I'm featuring your stories in the next drop, so don't be shy. Now grab your tea, dim the lights, and get ready. Because nothing in Whispers in the Fog is ever what it seems. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Locked Door at Midnight. The air was thick with rain, a steady patter, against the tall windows of Shillingstone Manor, where shadows danced between the flickering glow of a solitary oil lamp. Outside, a chill whispered through the sprawling gardens, every branch quaking as if sensing the disturbance within. Inside the manor, a sense of foreboding laced the atmosphere, drawing the attention of the house's inhabitants to the heavy oak door at the end of the hallway, which had been bolted shut since noon. At precisely midnight, the air filled with an ominous creak, as though the house, alive with secrets, stirred to life. Agatha, the housekeeper, had been silently polishing the silver cutlery when she heard the unmistakable sound of a muffled cry. Startled, she dropped the silver spoon she held, and the metallic clang echoed through the stillness. Panic surged within her. Of course, it was easy to dismiss a child's wail when one had heard nothing but the steady drip of raindrops all day. Without a second thought, she approached the locked door, her heart racing. Her instincts cautioned her that the door should remain undisturbed, that the ominous tales regarding the room behind it, dubbed by the villagers as the Room of Whispers, were not just fanciful gossip. Yet those cries pulled at her, sounding more desperate and ghostly with each passing moment. "Mr. Clarence," she called, her voice tremulous, as she hurried to find the manor's owner, a reclusive gentleman with a peculiar reputation for avoiding the company of others. Clarence Pemberton had come from a once-celebrated lineage, but now he spent his days penning incoherent manuscripts, slipping ever deeper into isolation and eccentricity. As she dashed through the dimly lit corridors, each creaking floorboard a reminder of her own mortality, she reached no answer from his chambers. But she was not alone for long. A sharp knock interrupted her frantic search, and she swung back toward the heavy door to find a figure appearing at the end of the hallway. Miss Marple, her presence, commanding yet gentle, stood wrapped in her shawl. Though she was dripping from the rain, her sharp gaze absorbed the scene with keen observance. "Agatha, what's all this fuss about?" Marple inquired softly, brushing back a damp curl. The housekeeper's eyes widened, momentarily shifting from fright to relief at the sight of the seasoned detective. "There are cries from behind that door," Agatha stammered, pointing nervously at the stout oak. "It's been locked since noon. I'm sure someone is trapped inside. We must get in." Marple nodded solemnly, her mind already working through an array of possibilities. "It is peculiar, isn't it? The hour, the locked door. Tell me, Agatha, could it be that Mr. Pemberton had company today?" Agatha frowned, confused. "No, I don't believe so, but there were whispers earlier, as if a gathering had occurred." Misdirection hummed in the air, and the detective mulled over the threads of mystery woven into the very fibers of the manor. The locked door, the muffled cries, the whispers. Perhaps there's a simpler solution, or a more complex one, she mused, tapping her chin as her eyes flicked to a nearby window where the rain had begun to ebb subtly. They returned to the door, and Marple placed her hand on the cool surface, feeling for any vibrations from within. "Do you happen to know how the door is locked?" she queried, her voice low and steady. "An old-fashioned key, I expect, but I wouldn't know. I never saw it." It hasn't been opened since the last incident. Last incident? Agatha's voice trembled, and she threw her glance to the floor, her secret suddenly laid bare. Yes, it's said that things have gone missing before. A few valuables from the family years ago. People thought the room contained what was lost, but it was always locked. Marple squinted at the door, her expression unveiling a mix of pity and curiosity. And have you ever seen anyone enter? No, but I have heard others, Agatha stuttered, gathering her composure quickly. Sometimes on stormy nights, I heard a woman's voice, soft and distressing, always at midnight. I've thought it mere fancy. But Marple's mind raced, gathering pieces of a puzzle that remained nerve-wrackingly unfinished. It's time we found Mr. Pemberton, she concluded, moving to step out of the shadows. But they were not alone. As Marple turned, the long, neglected door creaked open, seemingly on its own, revealing a sight neither woman was prepared for. Inside, the room was illuminated only by an old lamp, casting long shadows across dusty furniture and cobweb-laden corners. And at the center, sprawled on the floor, lay Mr. Clarence Pemberton, his face pale and lifeless, a veiled expression of terror etched across his features. "Dead," gasped Agatha. But before Miss Marple could respond, she noticed a flash of paper caught in the light beyond the body, sticking out from beneath the desk, fluttering softly as if beckoning her nearer. "Wait," Marple called, the urgency of the moment pressing against her. "Don't touch anything." But the distressed housekeeper had already moved closer, caught in the thrall of shock and disbelief. Yet it was the very object of her concern that held Miss Marple's attention most. "Look," she directed, her gaze narrowing on the pale piece of paper that began to slide out fully. Just as Agatha reached nervously for it, a sudden flash of thunder cracked outside, profound shadows stretching as the lights flickered ominously. The discovered paper seemed to unravel secrets of its own, holding a dark subtext that could unravel the tightly wound narrative of Shillingstone Manor. And in that instant, the mystery morphed. Who had locked the door? And who had grasped the life of Clarence Pemberton, the author of many secrets, and perhaps this very one? As the rain poured harder than ever, Miss Marple's curiosity peaked amidst the chaos, and she knew that they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The questions taunted them, and as Agatha leaned down to uncover more about the paper, Miss Marple felt a shiver race through her as the realization struck. This was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The Last Serving of Tea. The wind howled around the ancient manor, sending shivers through the bedraggled oak trees lining the garden path. Rain cascaded from the slate rooftops, each drop a reminder of the storm's brewing fury. Inside, however, the small tea room appeared as a refuge of domestic calm, with the comforting aroma of fresh scones resting upon delicate china. Miss Jane Marple, perched at a quaint table, absent-mindedly stirred her cup of Earl Grey, her keen eyes flickering toward the small group assembled. But a sudden disconcerting question loomed in the air. Where was Lucille Hargrove? Lucille had not been late for tea since her first visit to St. Mary Mead, a quaint village where gossip flourished quicker than the blooming flowers in spring. A promising young artist, she had arrived days prior, full of energy and charm, joyfully sharing her sketches of the manor's gardens. Yet here, in the wake of yesterday's tragedy, where the manor had hosted the yearly summer soirée, her absence now loomed ominously large. From the corner of her perceptive eye, Miss Marple spotted Phillips, the hawkish butler, standing rigidly at the entrance, his face as pale as the rain-soaked grounds outside. "Miss Marple," he hesitated, the faint tremor of his voice belying his usual stoic demeanor. "I regret to inform you that Miss Hargrove, she has been found in the drawing-room." A cascade of gasps erupted from the ladies present, heads swiveling toward Miss Marple, who, while the others grasped at pearls and clutched handkerchiefs, remained motionless. Calculated observations forming in her mind as Phillips continued. "She is unresponsive." They followed him in a daze through the ornately decorated hall, adorned with portraits of long-deceased ancestors gazing down with vacant eyes, as though they held secrets only the walls could remember. Miss Marple kept her senses brimming, as if drowning out the elevated commotion, unsettling her companions would reveal those hidden truths. Rounding the corner into the spacious drawing-room, the flickering candlelight fell atop Lucille Hargrove, draped peacefully across the plush settee as if merely asleep. The room bore eerie silence, save for the rasp of heartbeats and soft sobs echoing off the gilded frames. Fingers trembling, Miss Marple knelt beside the prone artist. Lucille's skin was cold, but showed no immediate signs of struggle, a peculiar stillness settling over the scene. The half-finished cup of tea rested on her lap, a pool of cooling liquid staining the fabric of her dress, and a sketchbook lay open atop the ornate side table. But no sketch held her hand. Instead, a single sheet containing a delicate drawing of St. Mary Mead's Church stood alone, intricate and gentle, as if it had been a tribute to the village itself. "Just tea," Miss Marple murmured, her mind racing. The cryptic message was heavy with unanswered questions. Why choose tea, so innocuous? Seconds ticked on, yet no one moved to summon help, trapped instead by the chilling implications. Just then, Millie Riverton, a fellow artist and Lucille's closest friend, burst forth. "She was fine yesterday. We had laughed and shared dreams of her exhibition. What has happened? It doesn't make sense." Her voice quivered, each word setting rhythm to the brewing confusion cloaking the room. Miss Marple noted the telltale glimmer of wetness in Millie's eyes, but also a shroud of something darker, a diffuse tension lurking in her brittle demeanor. A storm of emotions lurked beneath the surface, threatening to spill forth amongst the whispers of buried resentments and yearnings cloaked in elegance. "It is imperative we investigate further." Miss Marple rose, engaging with the young artist's shocked gaze. "Millie, did you notice anything peculiar about Lucille before we gathered today? Any sign of unusual behavior?" Millie hesitated, a whirlwind of thought passing through her unguarded expression. Well, she had expressed a desire to part with certain sketches, ones she'd kept closely guarded, but I thought it merely whimsical, miss. A sudden memory forged in Miss Marple's mind, rising like the fog that clung to the manor's windows. "Sketches? What sort of sketches?" Before Millie could respond, Phillips stepped forward. "For heaven's sake, we must notify the constable. Someone must be held accountable." His voice radiated nervous authority, earning him incredulous glances from the others, but Miss Marple remained focused. "No evidence of foul play reveals itself just yet. It is vital we tread carefully." She signaled for Phillips to halt, and as he opened his mouth to protest, her gaze hardened into resolute focus. "Any evidence to examine, Mr. Phillips?" Nodding curtly, he quickly returned to the room, the tension crackling around Miss Marple like static air. A few moments later, he returned, presenting an envelope as if it were a precious artifact. "Found near the back of the drawing room." With a curious glint in her eye, Miss Marple accepted it, her fingers trembling slightly against the crisp paper. "What is it?" "If I may conjecture, it appears to be a letter addressed to Miss Hargrove," Phillips informed her, his brows knit tightly. An unexpected reveal amongst her belongings. Miss Marple felt her heart pound. Mysteries often revealed their true significance through such unassuming artifacts. Holding the envelope, she turned it over gingerly, noting an elegant, flowing script, signature embossed beneath usually impeccable handwriting. As her fingers brushed the engraved initials, a tremor shot through her. This was not just any correspondence. This was a message from someone of prominence. "Investigate immediately, Phillips. Find the source of this letter," she commanded, the urgency in her voice piercing the veil of bewilderment clinging about them. But as Phillips departed, the storm outside unleashed its fury, sending a heavy thunder rumbling through the manor, shrouding them all in an oppressive gloom. Milly glanced at Miss Marple, eyes wide with a mixture of fright and defiance. Is this truly over? Can we find the truth behind her last moments? Miss Marple held the envelope close, a peculiar excitement igniting her already sharp mind. "This is just the beginning, my dear. With this letter, we may uncover more than we anticipated. Let us hope the storm yields clarity." As she ventured to open the envelope, the world outside erupted in a flash of lightning, illuminating the room just enough for a fleeting moment, revealing a shadow lurking among the portraits, vanishing before it could be named. The last serving of tea, indeed. Chapter 3. A letter arrives too late. The rain drummed heavily against the window panes of Miss Marple's cozy sitting room, the rhythmic tapping matched only by the distant rumble of thunder, echoing through the quaint village of St. Mary Mead. Within the warm embrace of her armchair, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her knitting resting on her lap, when the doorbell rang, a frantic sound that shattered the serene ambiance. She glanced at the wall clock. 6 o'clock. Too late for an evening visit. Frowning, she rose, her curiosity piqued. Opening the door, she found a drenched and trembling figure. It was Agnes Cromwell, the village postmistress. A violet scarf was soaked, clinging to her neck like frayed memories. "Miss Marple, you must come at once," she gasped, her eyes wide with alarm. "It's Mr. Edward Thorne. I think he's... well, something terrible has happened." Miss Marple felt a chill run down her spine as she grabbed her shawl. Edward Thorne, an affable man in his 60s, had recently expressed unsettling concerns about his peculiar neighbor, the reclusive Mr. Mervyn Gates. With throbbing dread, she followed Agnes through the rain-soaked streets of St. Mary Mead, their footsteps slapping against the cobblestones, compounding the tension in the air. They arrived at Thornell Manor, its looming silhouette shrouded in shadows, except for a single, flickering light in the drawing-room window. The atmosphere thickened as they neared the door, its bronze knocker gleaming malignantly in the pale glow. Agnes knocked briskly, and the door creaked open, revealing Edward slumped over his desk, a scatter of papers strewn across the surface. "Mr. Thorne," Miss Marple called out softly, but he didn't stir. Instead, a glistening envelope on the desk caught her eye, sealed with deep blue wax, strikingly unusual for a simple postal letter. She stepped cautiously toward the desk, her mind racing, when suddenly she heard a measured intake of breath behind her. "Stay back," a voice barked. It was Inspector O'Malley, tall and grim, his raincoat slick and dripping like a newly fashioned doppelganger of the surrounding gloom. "I've got this, Miss Marple." "Oh, really, Inspector, are you sure?" she replied, her eyes glancing sharply back to the desk. "You see, I believe that letter holds the key to this mystery. Key? O'Malley's skepticism was palpable, but he paused, his brow furrowing. He eyed the letter, and for the briefest moment, Miss Marple saw a flicker of interest glint through the veil of authority. Stepping closer, she could almost taste the tension in the air. It has been here too long. It arrived hours ago. This could explain why Mr. Thorne is incapacitated. She approached the desk, mindful of its secrets. Agnes, dear, would you fetch the doctor? I fear we may be in desperate need of him. As Agnes hurried away, Miss Marple trained her keen eyes back on Edward. She leaned closer, cautious not to touch him, but her instincts told her that his situation was grim. In her peripheral vision, she saw O'Malley contemplating the letter. "What is it you hope to find?" "This is just a correspondence," he murmured. Miss Marple's gaze flicked back. "Not just any correspondence, Inspector. The handwriting. Do you notice the slant? It's aggressive, unyielding, as if penned in anger or desperation. And this," she pointed discreetly, "look closely at the ink. It's smeared on the edges, as if it was hurriedly sealed." The inspector, now absorbed, leaned closer, instinct over authority guiding his movements. "What are you suggesting?" "I suggest Mr. Thorne may have read something he shouldn't have. Look, the address has been scratched out," Miss Marple noted, revealing the partially obliterated ink. "This could be very important. It may hint at someone who wished to keep their words hidden." The door creaked open again. Dr. Finlay had arrived. He quickly diagnosed Edward, but paused the examination, his expression mixed with respect and dread. "He's incapacitated, but not lost, I believe. A faint pulse yet. How unusual, Miss Marple." With O'Malley's attention torn between Miss Marple's insights and the doctor's examination, he turned in frustration. "This is all conjecture until solid evidence is found." Miss Marple smiled gently. "And yet, evidence may present itself in the most peculiar ways. Sometimes the murder is not the act. It is the silence before it, the message that arrives too late." As the clock chimed the hour, O'Malley returned to the desk, flipping the letter over. A mere scrap. A match to burn later, it seems. But just then, the light flickered violently, and with a rush, the room plunged into darkness. The chilling silence that enveloped them felt thick, a precursor to calamity. The trio stood frozen, breath held, when Miss Marple heard it. A muffled thud from behind the desk. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her heart racing. Then, as the electric lights flickered back to life, a shadow darted through the hallway outside, barely visible from where they stood. "Inspector!" Miss Marple exclaimed, and together they surged toward the hallway. But as they reached the exit, she stopped abruptly. "Wait, there's something on the floor." Crouching to retrieve it, she held it in the light. A small, crudely torn scrap of paper with a single phrase smeared across the surface. "It's not what it seems." Misdirection hung heavily in the air as a dark revelation lingered ominously within those words. The mystery deepened with every heartbeat, the walls of Thornell Manor breathing secrets that spiraled into chaos. As they moved back toward the drawing room, with urgency coursing through her being, the true game of wits had just begun. Little did Miss Marple know that time slipped through their fingers like the rainwater coursing down the manor's stones, and the secrets they unearthed could yield far graver consequences than any had anticipated. Chapter 4. The Will That Was Never Signed. The rain drummed against the window panes of the creaky Harrington Manor, a sound that seemed to synchronize with the pounding of Miss Marple's heart. She stood in the dimly lit study, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and a hint of something else, a faded jealousy perhaps, surging forward after the recent death of Lord Victor Harrington. Shadows danced across the room as lightning illuminated the aged portrait of Victor, gazing down from above with a critical eye, as if expecting the inevitable barrage of questions from the assembled guests still gathered for the reading of his will. Earlier that evening, a somber group had congregated in the drawing room, the flickering flames of the fireplace casting faint glimmers on the faces of the bereaved family and friends. They all seemed anxious, fidgeting in their seats, whispering conspiracies about what Victor's last wishes would entail. The tension escalated palpably, intensifying, with the distant rumble of thunder. Miss Marple leaned her head slightly, as sharp and alert as ever, a grandmotherly figure in a fraying cardigan with a curiosity rivaled only by her keen sense of observation. Something was amiss. Intrigue danced in the air like the rain outside. As the lawyer solemnly reached for the document, bound with a faded red ribbon, Miss Marple's eyes flitted about the room, absorbing each fleeting expression, particularly those of Lady Arabella, Victor's widow, the very portrait of poise tinged with masked dread. He cleared his throat, passed an uneasy glance at the anxious guests, and began, "My dear friends and family, it is with an exceedingly heavy heart that I present to you the final wishes of Lord Victor Harrington," he uttered, but his voice trailed off as he produced a single sheet of paper. It trembled slightly in his hand, a stark contrast to the stillness enveloping the room. "Wait!" cried Arabella, her voice trembling just as much as the sheet of paper. "This is impossible. There must be some mistake." "I assure you, my lady, everything is in order," the lawyer said, his tone calm, but his eyes betraying a hint of uncertainty. "This document, dated 3 months prior to Lord Harrington's death, distinctly outlines his wishes. The assets will be divided among the following individuals." But Miss Marple's sharp instincts surged. Something was terribly wrong. The delighted glances of Victor's relatives shifted into confusion, and then outright consternation as the lawyer outlined the peculiarities of the will, most notably a rather generous bequest to Geoffrey Hargrove, a distant cousin who had been but a mere shadow in the Harringtons' lives until Victor's later years. Arabella's mouth twisted in disgust, her carefully cultivated image of a grieving wife splintering before the gathered crowd. "Geoffrey, why on earth would he leave you anything?" she demanded, breaking the fragile silence left in the will's wake. Geoffrey, handsome but drawn, wore a bemused expression that stood in stark contrast to his wife's fury. "I don't know. Perhaps he found our late-night chats stimulating," he offered with a nervous chuckle that fell flat among the grim faces. "I didn't expect anything." As emotions bubbled and discourse spiraled into an accusation-strewn frenzy, Miss Marple withdrew slightly, her mind analyzing the scene with razor clarity. The circumstances reminded her of something her late friend had once mentioned: how most wills contained hidden motives veiled beneath the surface of customary bequests. Lady Arabella, bitterly rehearsing her charade of sorrow, didn't merely protest for the sake of the will, she was hurt, cornered even. Could she have been anticipating a larger legacy? When the dust had settled, Miss Marple excused herself from the room, her mind racing. Outside, the torrential rain had taken shape, creating slick streams that blurred the view of the manicured gardens. Chills coiled up her spine as she approached the library, where a thought flourished. If there was no signed will, there might be something else. something lurking in the shadows of Victor's past. She wasted no time, and she quietly rifled through the shelves of the ancient mahogany library. Miss Marple's thorough exploration ignited her inspiration. She had seen the old desk in the corner during the earlier gathering, slightly ajar, as if it too wept with secrets. The drawer was wedged shut, painted with dust and neglect, but with a gentle tug, it surrendered. A wave of indigo enveloped her as she unfolded a collection of papers. Among them lay an unfinished testament, scrawled hurriedly, the ink faint but unmistakable. Miss Marple's eyes danced over the words, a testament left unwelcomed, filled with grievances that Victor had never had the courage to voice. Suddenly, thunder boomed, and the lights flickered unceremoniously. Startled, the weight of the parchment constellated into a weightless void, its revelations materializing only for her questioning mind. Then, just as Miss Marple prepared to delve deeper into the miniature storm brewing inside the pages, a sharp gust swept through the room, extinguishing the solitary lamp that illuminated her chaos. Darkness rushed in. She found herself alone with her burgeoning doubts. Who could have wanted Victor silenced so gravely? She whispered to herself as the shadows encroached. A creak sounded at the study door, sending a shiver down her spine. Footsteps echoed faintly on the wooden floor, approached closer. Someone was nearby, someone who might see what she had unearthed. Miss Marple? A familiar voice broke the tension, but it wasn't reassuring. It was Lady Arabella. Chapter 5. Shadows in the Garden. The rain drummed a relentless tattoo against the window panes of St. Mary Mead's creaky old vicarage, casting an air of melancholy over the village that was palpable even to the driest soul. The narrow lanes glistened slickly underfoot, dark shadows alive with the creeping tendrils of mist that curled through the hedgerows. Miss Marple, a sturdy figure in her several decades of sensible clothing, peered through her fraying curtains, a sprig of rosemary still clutched in her weathered hand. Perhaps it was just the atmosphere, but something about the night felt peculiar, foreboding. As she turned away from the window, back to her modest sitting room, the fireplace flickered softly, roaring up cheerfully against the gloom. Outside, the dull thud of raindrops was interrupted by the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. A figure emerged from the mist, moving toward the rear of her neighbours, the Earl of Beddington. It was Mrs. Annie Purvis, the Earl's housekeeper, huddled against the rain, clutching a package. "Miss Marple," she called, her voice loud enough to pierce the rhythm of the storm. "Are you in?" "Here, dear Annie. What brings you out on a night like this?" Miss Marple shuffled back to the door, pulling hastily at her woolens to look the part of an able-minded friend. "I thought you ought to know, dear." Annie's breath came in rasping puffs, perhaps more from exertion than the chill in the air. "There's been a discovery out in the Earl's garden," she added, her eyes darting nervously toward the darkened expanse that stretched between their households. Miss Marple caught the tremor in Annie's voice. "What sort of discovery?" "A body, Miss Marple, a body among the roses," she whispered, seizing onto Miss Marple's arm as if drawing strength from the elder lady's presence. "Stay there," Miss Marple commanded, surprisingly sharp. "Arm yourself with a lantern. We must see what the Earl has unearthed." Together they ventured into the rain, a creeping sense of dread threading through Miss Marple's thoughts. The garden stood eerily quiet, the usual sounds of nocturnal life hushed beneath the weight of the storm. The majestic roses, their deep red petals streaked with raindrops, seemed to shiver around them as they stepped onto the wobbly path leading into the Earl's estate. They reached a patch bordered with thorns, and caught sight of what must surely be an isolated, fateful rendezvous at the foot of the old oak tree. There, half buried in mud, lay a figure shrouded in shadows and defiance against the elements. It was Edwin, the Earl's cousin, known to be a trifle too fond of the bottle and too eager to squander his inheritance. "Oh, dearest Edwin," Annie wretchedly gasped, falling to her knees in the muck, her damp fingers trembling as she clutched what remained of his jacket. "I warned him. I might have saved him, if he had only listened. What was he doing here alone?" "A pity indeed, dear Annie," Miss Marple replied, her mind racing. She knew Edwin had not been well liked in the village, drawn to the taverns and gambling dens of the town far more than the respectable home he should have cherished. Still, she observed the scene carefully, the angle of his body, the way his arms were cast awkwardly about him. It was not an accident. As the faint flicker of a lantern approached, Miss Marple caught a glimpse of something else, a small slip of parchment, wedged within Edwin's clenched fist. With careful precision, she eased it free, fingers deft enough to move through the shaking of shock. "What have you found?" Annie looked up, her eyes shiny with despair. "Not found, my dear. Uncovered." Miss Marple smoothed the damp parchment, revealing a hastily scrawled message that, amidst the rain's refusal to let anything remain clear, read, "It ends tonight. You know the truth." "What does that mean?" Annie cried, her voice breaking with fear. "Is he saying someone—" "I doubt he means to convey information. I think he was caught up in something much darker." A spark of realization flickered in Miss Marple's keen mind. Edwin was surely a drinker, but he wouldn't just wander off into the dark. Someone lured him here. "Miss Marple, you can't mean—" The approach of footsteps interrupted them, and Miss Marple looked back to see the Earl, flushed and glaring, silhouetted by the dim light of the lantern. "Stay where you are. What have you to do with this?" he bellowed, his brow furrowed with a mixture of anger and grief. "Innocent inquiry, Earl." Miss Marple stepped forward, her resolve firm and unyielding. "Your cousin has been murdered, and we are merely trying to understand why. Leave. You shouldn't be anywhere near here." He waved his lantern violently, water splattering across the floor. Annie recoiled, trying to shield her eyes against the unpredictable light. "Not so fast," Miss Marple replied, a touch of steel in her voice. "There are questions to answer, and I suspect this is but the start of an unsettling unearthing. There are shadows yet to clear." As an uneasiness settled like the thick fog around them, Edwin's tragic state lingered, echoing like a whispered secret. Miss Marple had made her deductions, but they danced tantalizingly out of reach. Before she could unravel the clues, a soft rustle brushed the bushes behind her. Then silence fell heavily, knotted with unspeakable tension. Perhaps the shadows concealed more than the body she found, or truths waiting among the garden's twisted vines. "Come with me, Annie. We have much to uncover," she rumbled, already glancing deeper into the gathering obscurity as the rain lashed mercilessly over them. The night was far from over. The lurking shadows promised secrets, and Miss Marple was ready to unearth them all. Chapter 6. The Vanishing Guest. The rain hammered against the Gothic windows of Elmsworth Manor, each drop echoing like the desperate clock in the hall. Miss Marple, seated in her usual armchair cloaked in a patchwork quilt, had been listening intently to the chatter among the guests gathered for the weekend. The fireside crackled with dubious warmth, casting flickering shadows that danced on the tapestries, while the aroma of the evening meal lingered like an unspoken tension. A veiled unease traced around the festivities, as if the very walls were whispering secrets, holding their breath for revelations that might never come. She had been part of the laughter and light conversation when a sudden shout shattered the evening calm. "He's gone!" Lord Alistair Whitmore, the host, stood at the doorway like a ghost himself, pale and trembling, his usual composure torn apart. The drawing-room fell silent, turning at once to a tableau of shocked faces. Lord Whitmore continued, his voice shaky. "Darling Arthur is missing." Just that afternoon, Arthur Everley had been the life of the party, charming the guests with tales of his travels. A man of many words and ambitions, Arthur was attempting to woo Lady Felicity, the lovely yet icy daughter of Lord Whitmore. Miss Marple had noticed the way the young lady's eyes sparkled at Arthur's stories, a contrast to her otherwise stoic demeanor. Despite the youth's lively spirit, the undertones of jealousy had begun to ripple throughout the manor, as other guests, particularly Mrs. Agnes Treadwell, the widow from down the lane, watched Arthur's flirtations with a hawkish glare. "Where did you last see him?" Miss Marple asked, her steadfastly calm voice cutting through the chaos. "He excused himself after dinner to fetch his coat," Lord Whitmore replied, closing his eyes in desperation. "That was nearly an hour ago. I thought he merely lingered, but—" "Nonsense," Miss Marple interrupted gently, fox-like lucidity sharpening her gaze. "If he mentioned fetching a coat, it may still be there, wherever he vanished to. The rain would have discouraged him from wandering far." "Arthur wouldn't have just walked off," chided Lady Felicity, voice rising in a panic. "He wouldn't leave without a word. Perhaps it's an ill-practical joke." "A joke?" scoffed Mrs. Treadwell, stepping forward, adorned in layers of faded silk, like an owl caught in twilight. "I think there are no jokes when a young man disappears." Her eyes glinted with mischief, or perhaps something darker. Miss Marple's shrewd, attentive glance shifted between the guests. The tension between Lady Felicity and Mrs. Treadwell was palpable, weaving an unseen web of motives that fluttered in the heavy air like trapped moths. Deciding on action, she rose from her chair. "It may be prudent to check the coat room." Her voice was steady, yet the urgency flickered in her eyes. "It might lead us to find him, or at least a clue as to where he might be." The party followed her lead, slipping through the cold corridors of the manor, the distant thunder mirroring their anxiety. They reached the coat room, which held an odd mustiness, while the shadows of garments swayed idly like spectres. As they rummaged through pockets and hangers, Miss Marple's hands moved with experience, knowing all too well that often it was the small detail tucked away that revealed much more. "Look!" exclaimed one of the guests, a Mr. Hargrove, lifting a crumpled note from inside a hat. It fluttered like a bird's wing in the damp air. Miss Marple stepped closer, her heartbeat steady despite the mounting tension. She unfolded it with deliberate care. The handwriting was hurried and touched by desperation, saying simply, "Meet me at the Old Oak. Midnight. We must not tell." The crowd murmured, "Adultery." Mrs. Treadwell clucked her tongue in disdain. "That charming young man has a secret he's involved with. Who would—" "Not so fast," Miss Marple interjected, a glint in her eyes. "The note could be innocuous. Young men do have secrets, some innocent, some not. But the oak, that could be the very tree at the edge of Whitmore's estate. What concerns me, however, is the mention of we. Who might be involved?" "That's impossible," protested Lady Felicity, her voice wavering. "Arthur would never engage in such nonsense. He's far too respectable." "Oh, is he?" Youth can oft be wrapped up in excitement and dangerous games, came Mrs. Treadwell, a sly smile creeping upon her features. Might I add that it isn't uncommon for delusions of grandeur to accompany anticipatory alliances? Before Miss Marple could respond, a loud clap of thunder rattled the manor, causing the candles to flicker. The laughter and gossip faded, replaced by the echoes of unease as the storm tightened around them. "Wait," called out Lord Whitmore. "If that note bears any weight, we should warn the local constable. Arthur could be in danger or lost. Or he is part of something that needs revealing," Miss Marple interjected sharply, her brow furrowing. As the guests debated the merits of action versus panic, Miss Marple turned towards the door, her mind already reeling with possibilities. She felt a pull, the old oak standing stubbornly against the storm, an emblem of truth yet to be unearthed. Something deep within echoed the urgency of uncovering not just Arthur Everleigh's whereabouts, but the tangled web of heartache and jealousy surrounding him. "Where is Arthur?" she whispered.
Who can that be?
Chapter 7. A Whisper from the Dead. The rain lashed against the windows of St. Mary Mead, each drop echoing through the shadows of the dimly lit Elmsworth Manor. Within the expansive, creaky confines of the aging building, a chill drifted, amplified by an oppressive quiet that enveloped the household. There, in her favorite armchair, feeble yet unyielding, sat Miss Marple, a faded shawl draped over her shoulders, her keen eyes alert for any disturbance. It was often the seemingly mundane that gave rise to profound revelations. Earlier that evening, the family had gathered to discuss recent events, the untimely death of young Leonard Elmsworth and the lingering strangeness that had followed. The electric atmosphere, charged with grief but peppered with suspicion, had set the stage for the night's unfolding drama. Miss Marple, always an observer, sensed undercurrents that others failed to notice. A sudden creaking interrupted her contemplations, and a figure appeared at the door. It was as Gerald Elmsworth, Leonard's elder brother, his usually handsome features contorted with anxiety. "Miss Marple, I need to speak with you, alone." His voice had a tremor, raw and unsteady. Miss Marple nodded, her mind swirling with thoughts. "Very well, Gerald. We shall retire to my study." She gestured toward the adjacent room. They moved through the cold corridor, the light from a single lamp flickering as if fit for a ghost story. Inside the study, piled high with books, Miss Marple settled into her chair, motioning for Gerald to sit across from her. "I found something," he began, hastily digging into the pocket of his smart, albeit damp, tweed blazer. As he withdrew his hand, he revealed a crumpled piece of notepaper, its edges blackened by the ink of urgency. It was hidden in Leonard's desk until this evening. With a gentle hand, Miss Marple took the note. Her brow furrowed as she read the scrawled message. "Meet me at midnight by the old oak," it read, cryptically signed with a jagged L. She glanced up sharply at Gerald. Leonard had a meeting, did he? Gerald's expression darkened, shadows dancing across his face. "I had no idea. He was secretive these past few weeks, more so than usual. Perhaps it was related to that mysterious woman." His voice dripped suspicion, hinting at jealousy and resentment. "The woman you mentioned before," Miss Marple prompted, her eyes narrowing with perceptive intent. "The one from London?" "Yes. Her name's Adele Lawrence. He met her in some rather questionable circumstances, I believe." He shifted uncomfortably. "I feared it was merely a passing affair, but now—" He trailed off, consumed by the gravity of his thoughts. Miss Marple's interest piqued. "What's troubling you, Gerald? Is it solely your brother's infatuation that vexes you?" He hesitated, staring at his hands folded in his lap, before finally admitting, "Leonard was to inherit all of this. Everything. The family estate, the money. I'm left with nothing of value, and I can't help but feel that you wished it were you instead," Miss Marple finished, her tone soft, yet direct. "Choices lead to consequences. It would be unwise to harbor resentments, especially now." Gerald's demeanor shifted, indignation rising to the surface. "You think I would harm my own brother? There's no need to play the armchair psychologist, Miss Marple. I'm not a monster." The tension crackled between them like thunder in the distance. Just then, an unsettling sound echoed. From beyond the walls, a low thud that sent a shiver through Miss Marple. "Did you hear that?" Gerald nodded, apprehension lining his features. "I had thought I was just imagining it." "Let's investigate," she said resolutely, her senses alert. Together, they retraced their steps back into the main hall, the storm whipping fervently outside, as if nature itself wanted to veil the secrets lying in wait. With hesitant steps, they followed the faint sound emanating from the drawing room. As they pushed the heavy door ajar, the flickering flames of the fireplace illuminated the scene. It was chaos. Books were thrown about, and a small globe had toppled to the floor, rolling silently toward them, a dark omen. "Leonard's study," Gerald said incredulously. "How could anyone have entered without us noticing?" Miss Marple furrowed her brow in thought, her mind racing with the implications. The notepaper lay exposed on the side table, momentarily forgotten amidst the disarray. "There is something to consider," she said, benevolently contemplating. "If Leonard was being followed or spied upon, that note could suggest something dire. A dangerous liaison, perhaps?" The air grew thick with unease as she examined the books strewn about. One particular volume, an old tome about local legends, caught her eye. Its spine and pages were markedly newer than the rest. "Gerald, look here," Miss Marple said, approaching the shelf. She extracted the book, a smoothness to the leather, indicating it had been pulled out of place recently. Flipping through the pages, she discovered a loose folded paper hidden inside. As she opened it, her eyes widened. "Goodness!" she exclaimed, the air thick with unvoiced horrors. The paper contained an intricate sketch of the very oak tree mentioned in the note, with lines drawn meticulously to illustrate a pathway leading away from the estate. "Miss Marple?" "What is it?" Gerald urged, grasping her arm in concern. "I suspect this has vital importance, Gerald. The oak tree not only signifies a meeting point, but also connects us to the heart of the mystery." Before she could explain further, the lights flickered ominously, plunging the room into darkness. Panic seized Gerald as he fumbled in the shadows. And then came a bone-chilling whisper, soft yet grave, a voice echoing against the storm that raged outside. "Help me!" The plea hung in the air, a spectre creeping across the wood-floored manor, a harbinger, a call from beyond. Miss Marple's heart raced, every instinct sharpening. She turned slowly to face Gerald, her mind racing with profound implications and dark revelations. "We're not alone," she whispered, her voice scarcely audible. And as the shadows deepened around them, the night unfolded yet another twist in a tale that sought to keep its secrets buried. What dark truths lay waiting, and who was truly speaking from the dead? Chapter 8. The Clue Beneath the Floorboards. The relentless patter of rain drummed a dismal serenade against the small window panes of Gable Manor, its longevity likely echoing the despair that hung over its inhabitants. Inside, the gathered guests, damp and shivering, exchanged furtive glances beneath heavy brows, shadows dancing in the flickering light of the fireplace. In the midst of it all, Miss Marple sat with her knitting, a picture of delicacy and yet intriguing resolve, feeling the palpable tension in the room. Earlier that evening, the body of the widowed Lady Montgomery had been discovered in the library, an act that had transformed an evening of tea and gossip into one of trepidation and fear. Lady Montgomery, once the vibrant host, now lay lifeless, her silk dress a tragic whisper of elegance, tarnished by tragedy. The guests had all been present in the manor at the time of her death, making it clear that one of them was a cunning murderer. As the clock struck 8, the storm outside rose to a fury, throwing shadows across the parlor walls and draining all remaining warmth from the sumptuous surroundings. Miss Marple's concentration pierced through the storm, her mind racing with possibilities. Who could have committed such a dastardly deed? The parlor door creaked open, and in stepped Mr. Edwin Smith, Lady Montgomery's distant cousin, his face pale and his collar damp from the rain. The Yorkshireman was a cautious man. His soft-spoken demeanor could easily disguise a fierce determination. But tonight, a shadow seemed to flicker beneath his earnest gaze. "I must confess, Miss Marple," he stuttered, "I had a rather heated argument with my aunt mere days ago, regarding her intention to sell the estate. You see, her generosity has always pushed my fortunes to the brink." He stopped, eyes darting toward the group, as if wondering how much they might already know. "But I would never harm her. I loved her dearly." Miss Marple nodded, contemplating his words. The not-so-veiled resentment he held toward her aunt, however tangled, painted a more insidious persona than his gentle visage suggested. As he excused himself, she couldn't shake an uncomfortable sensation that he was holding back, much like the tempest outside, almost threatening to erupt. At the sound of a muffled sob, she turned to find Anne Calder, the family's live-in companion, her young face streaked with tears. "I just can't understand who could do this, Miss Marple. Lady Montgomery was like a mother to me," she said, her voice trembling. Yet Miss Marple noted the quick flicker of something behind Anne's expressive eyes. Anger, perhaps? Desperation? Clara was hardly able to sustain a facade of sorrow when the wind howled and the woman she services lay in a shroud. "Perhaps it was her strong will that drove someone to madness," remarked Mr. Peters, a stocky middle-aged solicitor who prided himself on logical thinking. "Her plans to divide the estate had ruffled more than a few feathers. Yet it had ruffled yours enough to be in need of being present for its change," Miss Marple interjected, her gaze piercing into his eyes. The conversation lulled, as everyone was unwilling to plunge deeper into the waters of accusation, each detraction steeped with dread of what further revelations might lurk. It was a macabre game of chess, and Gable Manor had become a makeshift courtroom. "I intend to examine the library," she stated quietly, gathering her belongings with a sense of purpose. "Who will join me?" Consent was lukewarm, yet curiosity forced everyone to their feet, and they plunged forward into the humid corridor. As they entered the library, the air was stifling, the tension almost palpable. An assortment of trophies, from Lady Montgomery's travels, exotic artifacts, lavish paintings, lined the walls, growing dimmer beneath the encroaching darkness. "Do you think it was someone from the party?" Mrs. Lawrence, a hush of apprehension lacing her voice, asked. The words seemed a whisper against the rustling of a nearby curtain. "I wouldn't rule it out," Miss Marple said, as her eyes scanned the room, drinking in every detail. "But one must know how to manipulate a situation, and that requires understanding." Carefully, she edged toward the tension-wrought card table littered with frivolous notes. Her attention was drawn toward a bookcase that extended to the ceiling. "What of this?" She ran her fingers along the spines, detecting an oddity. "This one seems askew." With a gentle nudge, the bookshelf creaked and shifted, revealing a narrow opening beneath it. A gasp erupted from Anne. "What if something's living in there?" Miss Marple felt her pulse quicken as they crowded around, widening the gap. "Let us not jump to conclusions. I suspect we uncover a hidden compartment instead." Pushing aside the dust and rummaging, Miss Marple's fingers brushed against something unyielding. Her heart raced. It was an envelope, yellowed by age, brittle to her touch. Upon drawing it out, she saw a familiar, elegantly penned note. This changed everything. It was a letter from Lady Montgomery, dismissing Edwin's financial dependency, and within was an unmistakably crippling remark. It proved her intent to cut him loose, for good, to sever ties entirely. "Miss Marple, what is it?" Someone from the crowd gasped, shadows gathering around the uncovering gleam in her eyes. "Hush," she commanded softly, flipping the letter around for them all to see. Lines that once whispered of love now screamed of betrayal, and the room felt smaller, as if it held its breath. "With this letter, we now grasp a motive more tangible than mere grief." As the guests voiced their disbelief, Miss Marple held the letter high, knowing all too well that within this curl of parchment resided the spark of truth. Suddenly, vibration jolted through the floorboards beneath her feet. The room trembled, and through the cracks a low, guttural sound echoed like a lament from the past. "What was that?" Mr. Peters exclaimed, his face now awash in a shade of pale. "Moving large furniture, perhaps," Anne offered, though her eyes, wide as saucers, spoke otherwise. Miss Marple, however, sensed something far more ominous beneath, a potential clue hidden in the very flooring beneath their feet, one that promised answers they were not yet prepared to fathom. "Perhaps we ought to investigate further," Miss Marple replied, glancing at the darkened corners of the room. With that ominous proclamation hanging in the air, they descended further into the thoughts of treachery and revelation. But it was clear. They had aroused something waiting beneath the weary manor floors, lurking in the shadows of secrets long forgotten. The chase for the truth was far from over, and all eyes were on Miss Marple as anticipation danced in the air, crackling like the wild lightning outside. Chapter 9. The Final Trap. The rain lashed against the leaded windows of Merton Manor, its relentless drumming a fitting symphony for the evening's sinister atmosphere. Miss Marple perched on the edge of a faded brocade armchair, a delicate china teacup cradled in her hands, her eyes darting toward the drawing-room door with the intensity of a hawk. It was a night ripe with danger. A sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air, thickening with each roll of thunder. "Such a dreadful storm, isn't it, Miss Marple?" asked Mrs. Thornfield, the housekeeper, her voice tremulous as she momentarily stepped into the room, her apron drenched from her earlier trek to the kitchen. The flickering candlelight seemed to flicker back at her, as if disturbed by the restless wind. "Yes, indeed, Mrs. Thornfield," Miss Marple replied, her voice calm, yet laced with anticipation. There was something unshakably unsettling about the evening. The electric tension in the air, not merely due to the storm outside. Merton Manor, with its towering oak doors and creaking floorboards, whispered secrets, and Miss Marple was anxious to unearth them. It had been nearly a week since Lord Harrington had met his grim fate, discovered lifeless in his study, hidden in a tangle of loose papers and broken dreams. The quaint village of St. Mary Mead had been engulfed in scandal and suspicion. Every resident had something to hide, even the venerable aunt, to whom she had once offered knitting lessons. Miss Marple had learned much over pots of tea and innocent chatter, yet all the intricate webs she had spun revealed only half-truths. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, and the door swung open with a reluctant creak. It was Inspector Craddock, his brow furrowed and his overcoat soaked. "Miss Marple, I must insist you exercise caution," he warned, his tone both grave and respectful. "I've had news of a second attempt on Lady Edith's life." Miss Marple's keen eyes sharpened. Lady Edith, Lord Harrington's devoted wife and emotional centre of the household, had shown grit and resolve in the face of recent calamities, but held a secret of her own. "Has she been threatened again?" she asked, her heart racing. "Only threats at this stage, but there are whispers. I have reason to believe someone intends to finish what they started." He ran a hand through his hair, drenched as his coat. "You should come to the estate, but I fear you may be walking into a trap." Miss Marple nodded, her instincts igniting. "What kind of trap, Inspector?" "Lady Edith is planning a gathering tonight, ostensibly to discuss her late husband's affairs," he explained, glancing at the window as another gust howled outside. "But the atmosphere is charged, full of resentment. Someone at this party may be harboring dark intentions." Under the dim light, Miss Marple could see the urgency on Inspector Craddock's face. "We must go at once," she urged, setting her tea down with trembling hands. "If they are indeed plotting foul deeds, we cannot allow them to succeed." They travelled to the estate with the storm raging around them, the narrow path splattered with mud and water. On arrival, Miss Marple noted the scene was remarkably calm, given the looming threat. The guests, vilely concealed pretenders, mingled in elegant parlours, their laughter devoid of warmth, all sheltering ulterior motives under the guise of mourning. As the evening wore on, Miss Marple made her rounds, observing every interaction with penetrating scrutiny. Lady Edith was beset with questions about her husband's will, while Cornelia, the sharp-tongued socialite, cornered guests with idle gossip laced with venom. In the corner of the room, Eugene, the delicate artist and Lord Harrington's protégé, clutched a glass of sherry, his trembling hands betraying nerves. "Ah, Miss Marple," he mumbled as she approached. "What a night to be discussing tragedy. One cannot escape the shadows of this house." "Indeed, Mr. Aston," she replied, her mind sharp as a blade. "But one must not shy away from truths, especially when illusions are so thick." As if summoned by her intuition, raw voices flared from the dining room. Cornelia had accused Lady Edith of foul play, her words laced with scorn. "You think your husband's death grants you free rein over his fortune, Edith? Hardly. I'd wager you stand to gain the most." Tension rippled across the room. The guests recoiled, uncomfortably shifting their weight. Miss Marple stepped forward, her demeanour composed, yet her thoughts were tumultuous. "What manner of accusations are these?" she questioned, casting her discerning gaze over the assembly. Before Lady Edith could respond, a sharp crash erupted from the library, shattering the already strained ambience. In the flurry of panic, Miss Marple darted toward the sound, accompanied by the ever-watchful Inspector Craddock. What they found was a scene of chaos. The tall bookcase had toppled, spilling tomes and papers across the floor. A sore glimmer at the corner of Miss Marple's eye caught her attention. There, among the debris, was a ledger, its pages filled with spidery handwriting, notes jotted down in a frantic hand. "Miss Marple, look," Craddock urged, pointing toward the incriminating text. As she gingerly picked it up, a name leaped out at her, a name she had encountered in hushed whispers over the past few days. "Lydia Holcroft," she murmured, her breath catching in her throat. The revelation bore weight upon her shoulders, for Lydia was not merely a name. She was Lady Edith's closest friend, a woman shrouded in both loyalty and jealousy. Suddenly, a thunderous clap of lightning illuminated the room, revealing a shadowy figure darting away from the turmoil. The door swung closed, with a finality that left an imprint of doom. "Stop!" Miss Marple cried. But it was too late. The figure melted into the darkened corridors of the manor. As her heart raced, one thought leapt into focus. The trap had already been set. And now, the true game of deception was about to begin. Miss Marple's hands tightened around the ledger as its presence allowed her insight into a world far murkier than she had initially perceived. The clues were there, suffocated beneath layers of deceit, and she was determined to unearth them, piecing together the next shadowy puzzle ahead. Chapter 10. The Truth Buried in the Garden. Rain fell in a relentless staccato rhythm, drumming against the weathered slate of the old manor. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and foliage, turning the garden behind Green Hollow into a misty realm of shadows. Miss Marple stood at the edge of the expansive flower beds, her keen blue eyes scanning the overgrown chaos with the composure that marked a seasoned detective. A small trowel rested in her gloved hands, untouched as she stared at the disturbance beneath the Heligoland daisies that had known only peace until now. "Miss Marple," a voice quavered through the downpour, yanking her from her musings. It was Mrs. Adelia Wentworth, the manor's imperious housekeeper, whom Miss Marple had always found to be as steadfastly constructed as the bricks of the house she served. Even now, with rain-soaked skirts and an expression of horror, Mrs. Wentworth stood firm on the wooden porch, desperately bracing herself against the wind. "The master, he's gone," she exclaimed, her breath coming in sharp inhales. "You must come. Mr. Anthony has vanished." Miss Marple's heart seized momentarily. A pit deepened in her stomach. Anthony Wentworth was an enigmatic man, shrouded in shadows of long-held family grievances and whispered disappointments. "Vanished?" she repeated, her tone unwavering. "Or perhaps hiding from the memories of his past? Do you think it's connected?" The housekeeper's eyes widened, fear lurking just beneath her controlled demeanor. Miss Marple nodded, intuition flickering like candlelight. The mysteries surrounding Green Hollow were entwined, the fabric of relationships thick with secrets. "Perhaps we should investigate the garden first. It may hold the key to understanding Mr. Wentworth's motives, or to finding him." As they ventured into the gloomy expanse, Miss Marple noticed the sporadic footprints muddying the otherwise pristine earth. One could easily navigate the garden paths in good weather, yet the heavy rain had blurred the lines, transforming familiar trails into treacherous bogs. Who has been out here? She pondered aloud, her mind churning. It appears that someone has ransacked this part of the garden recently. Ransacked? Mrs. Wentworth echoed, skepticism seeping into her voice. Aye, Miss Marple murmured, kneeling to examine the ground closely. The disturbance appears quite fresh, likely within the last week. The ground is dark yet soft, revealing that someone employed tools rather than brute force. Tools? In the garden? Mrs. Wentworth frowned, recalling Mr. Wentworth's avowed distaste for manual labor. What could... Ah! The exclamation escaped Miss Marple's lips as her fingers brushed against something cold and hard. She unearthed a small, rusted pocket watch, the chain glistening beneath the twilight. Its surface was scratched and worn, yet a small engraving stood out. The initials AFW circled delicately around the case. AFW? Miss Marple pondered, her mind racing. Could it belong to Mr. Wentworth, or perhaps his sister, Fern? Mrs. Wentworth looked skeptical. Fern has been dead for years, and I'd imagine something so personal would have remained in the family vault. Indeed, Miss Marple stated, her brow furrowing as she examined the watch more closely. Oddities tinged her thoughts. A pocket watch belonging to the late Fern Wentworth had not been mentioned in any of the accounts leading up to this moment. So why is it here, muddied in the soil? Before Mrs. Wentworth could reply, a chilling gust swept through the garden, causing the trees to moan softly. Suddenly, a sinister idea took root in Miss Marple's mind. She feared the notion that Anthony's disappearance and Fern's tragic death might not be as distant as they seemed. Buried secrets often lingered beneath the surface in gardens as coarse as this, only to be discovered by those bold enough to dig. They returned to the house, where shadows danced, inside the grand drawing room, and anxieties hung heavier than the overcast sky. Miss Marple found her thoughts swirling in a tempest, but she knew one thing. Something suspicious shadowed the vibrancy that Green Hollow once showcased. Just as they stepped inside, the thunder's groan resonated through the corridor, echoing the impending chaos. The air was thick with tension as a figure emerged from the shadows, hair soaked and face taut with urgency. It was Harold Fisher, a local solicitor, the one man who had navigated the labyrinth of the Wentworth family estate. "Miss Marple, we have trouble," he rushed, his words mingling with the rain's percussion. "The police are looking for Anthony. They say Mrs. Wentworth has accused him of theft. Something very valuable has gone missing from the safe." "Something valuable?" Miss Marple whispered, her heart racing at the implications. What was it? "A family heirloom, an emerald pendant. Mrs. Wentworth claims Anthony has taken it. Without any proof? He's the heir," Marple replied, angered by the miscarriage of judgment. "I suspect it is more complicated than that." But before she could gather her thoughts and connect the threads, an urgent knock resounded at the door, drawing every eye. Mrs. Wentworth stiffened. Her apprehension radiated through the air, while Harold swallowed hard, shifting nervously. "Perhaps someone else has arrived?" Miss Marple chuckled nervously, alluding to the impending uncertainty that surrounded her small circle of acquaintances. As the door swung open to reveal an unkempt constable, Miss Marple stepped forward, carefully observing the expression of defeat that cloaked him. "Miss Marple," he began, his voice trembling, "we've found something remarkable in the garden." And with his next words, the very foundations of their assumptions began to shift. "It's a body." For a moment, time froze. The rain continued to pour, the shadows deepened around them, and the truth Miss Marple sought lay, buried far deeper than she could have ever imagined. Chapter 11. The Confession. No one heard. The rain fell in thick sheets, cascading from the eaves of the old Wythe manor, each droplet echoing like distant footfalls in the stillness of the night. Miss Marple, nestled within the dimly lit drawing-room, peered through the window as the storm erased the distant village of St. Mary Mead into a watery haze. An unsettling silence descended, interrupted only by the rhythmic sound of the downpour against the glass. Something was amiss. A troubling sensation prickled at the back of her mind, urging her to pay close attention. It was a night of dark secrets, and Miss Marple was acutely aware that shadows not only concealed the eyes of the guilty, but also whispered of unspoken truths. A shudder ran through the house as a lightning flash illuminated the room, and in that brief glow she caught a glimpse of the portrait of Cyril Wythe, patriarch and recently deceased. The very image seemed to leer down at her, as if urging her to uncover the mystery buried in the depths of sorrow. The night had been intended for the reading of Cyril's will, a clattering affair brought about by whispers of a family feud and hidden legacies. As the clock struck 10, the family members gathered in the drawing-room, all except for Clara, Cyril's estranged niece, who had yet to arrive. Tension hung thick in the air, blending with the scent of damp wood and rain-soaked earth, as the heirs awaited the lawyer, Mr. Hollis, who would unveil the contents of the will. "Nothing should take such a time," whispered Hugo, Cyril's younger brother, tapping his fingers nervously against the side of his chair. Marple couldn't help but notice the telltale flash of something dark in his eyes, a flicker of anger buried beneath layers of propriety. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Clara entered, her pale face drawn and weary, as if the storm had sucked the life from her. Miss Marple's instincts stirred to life. She had seen that dazed expression all too often before. "I couldn't leave my thoughts behind," Clara mumbled, her voice barely rising above the sound of the rain. "There's much to be done." The atmosphere shifted. Every eye darted toward her, apprehension threading through the air. In a remarkably poised manner, Miss Marple observed Clara's hands, trembling slightly as they fidgeted with the edge of her shawl. The sudden arrival of the lawyer, a stout man with a head of tousled hair, broke the tension as he cleared his throat and unfolded the document entrusted to him. In his last years, Cyril had always been inclined to jest. It seems his will reflects that sentiment quite amusingly, Mr. Hollis began, his voice steady despite the storm. But as he read aloud, a small unease gripped Miss Marple when she realized that Cyril had bequeathed much of his fortune not to his immediate kin, but rather to charitable organizations, a twist that echoed loudly in the silence. "Did he intend to leave us nothing?" cried Eleanor, Cyril's widow, her pale face flushing with indignation. "What manner of him was this jest?" "Perhaps he knew too much," Clara interjected, her voice heavy with unshed tears. "Secrets exchanged in the shadows of this very house." Before the words could settle, a flash of lightning filled the room with an electric glare. In that brief moment, Miss Marple observed something, a glimmer of recognition in Clara's eyes. The dawning horror quickly twisted into a mask of acceptance, as if some deeply rooted truth had come dangerously close to the surface. "Clara," Miss Marple murmured, her voice low but firm, "what secrets do you hold?" Just then, the lights flickered, plunging them into darkness, before Mr. Hollis's lamplight steadied and resumed its illuminating glow. The flicker brought panic. Shadows danced wildly across the walls, and Miss Marple felt an urgent need to receive the revelation beating within Clara's heart. A confession waiting on her lips. Hours crept by as the gathering descended into an uneasy quiet. Old grudges simmered, and accusations hung unspoken. But before Miss Marple could unravel the web of suspicion, a frantic knock echoed through the manor. Startled, Mr. Hollis dashed to the door, revealing a drenched, dishevelled constable who introduced himself as Constable Phillips. "Begging your pardon, gentlemen," Phillips gasped, drawing a quick breath. "But someone has discovered something in the rain at the old churchyard. It's a body." A gasp erupted from Eleanor, and Miss Marple stood, resolve hardening within her. For a moment, clarity reigned. "A body? Who is it?" she demanded, her eyes darting across the worried faces. "Evidence suggests it's Cyril Wythe," Phillips grimaced, recalling the grim details. "He was never meant to be buried until tomorrow, but we found a bloody handkerchief in the vicinity, inscribed with initials CW. Miss Marple's mind whirled. A handkerchief, a mere piece of fabric, but one fraught with implications. Among the facades of their familial facade lay deceit, and with it, an unholy storm. The confessions remained tangled, sliding seamlessly into the night's chill as fear gripped the family gathered at the manor. Clara clutched at her shawl, her eyes wide. No one heard it. None of us knew he was dead. Miss Marple felt the weight of a revelation, lurking like the storm itself. What hidden truths would the morning light unveil? As she locked eyes with Mrs. Wythe, disquiet surged within her. Her instincts screamed that the night was far from over. "Tomorrow's revelations will be vital," she announced, a chill traveling down her spine. "For even now, secrets lie waiting with the dawn." With that, Miss Marple withdrew into herself, the chaotic tangle of truths unfolding quietly in her mind. A quest for clarity amidst rising tides of doubt. The confession remained elusive, pending and poised like the stark figures illustrated in the shadows. However, she knew one thing for certain. When the morning came, the storm would unveil more than just the drenched village of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 12. The Secret Beneath the Staircase. The wind howled through the ancient trees, rain cascading down in sheets against the windows of the old Victorian manor. Miss Marple, seated in her favourite armchair by the crackling fire, peered at the shadows flickering along the walls. The November night seemed drenched in mystery, a fitting backdrop for the occasion that had drawn her to this quiet hamlet. She took a sip of her chamomile tea, her thoughts plagued by the grim circumstances that brought her here. Earlier that evening, as she sipped tea in the company of Lady Denby, a manservant had dashed in with news that struck like lightning. Sir Reginald Denby, esteemed local historian and accidental target in this web of deceit, had been found lifeless near the staircase in the library. The words hung heavy in the air, igniting the unease that had gripped the estate since the first murder. Miss Marple had slipped into action, her intuition honed to a fine edge as she took her leave of Lady Denby's stammering protests. The massive oak staircase, winding up through the Gothic spires to the upper floors, was a prominent feature of the house. It was there that the tragedy had unfolded, just beneath the countless tomes that had chronicled the rich tapestry of the village's history. Upon arriving in the library, the rain-laden air chill crawled over her skin. The room was a blend of shadows and candlelight, casting a surreal ambiance. In the center lay Sir Reginald, an immaculately dressed man in his 50s, with glasses askew and a book an ancient volume on local legends clutched tightly to his chest. Miss Marple examined the scene with a thoroughness that was second nature to her, quickly noticing something among the strewn papers nearby. A blue silk handkerchief, embroidered with the initials M.L. Zrania, gleamed dully against the mahogany floor. "What do you make of that?" a voice said, drawing her back from her reverie. It was Inspector Craven, the local constable who had arrived soon after the discovery. His brow was furrowed in confusion. "An elegant touch, isn't it?" she replied, meeting his gaze. "It belongs to Lady Denby, does it not? The M.L. stands for Margaret Louise." "It does, but what would it be doing here?" Craven frowned. "She wouldn't just leave it behind, would she? She was just upstairs when it happened." Miss Marple sensed the tension tightening in the room as she nodded thoughtfully. Indeed. Her sharp mind began to weave through the strands of connection. "Can you find Lady Denby? It's crucial we understand her whereabouts at the time. And what about the other guests, each one a potential witness or suspect?" In moments, Craven had summoned the anxious guests. They filed into the library, their faces pale, shadows of fear cast through the dim light under the weight of tragedy. Miss Marple's keen eyes flicked toward Colonel Bramwell, a man shaken by the news, who had rumored many a secret shared over sherry in the corners of the mansion. Next to him, Mrs. Abernathy, the widow with a penchant for gossip, clutched her pearls so tight it seemed they might fracture. "Well, my dear," Mrs. Abernathy gasped, breathless. "What a dreadful scenario. He was so alive, so—" She hesitated, scouring for the right word. "Obnoxious to some of us, wasn't he?" Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. "Obnoxious? Perhaps more relatable than we think. His overwhelming need to unearth village secrets hasn't endeared him to everyone." The chatter ceased abruptly, the words hanging in the air like specters. "We'll start with the handkerchief, then. It must mean something," declared Craven, turning to the group. He fixed his steely gaze first on Lady Denby, who was pale but composed. "Do you recognize this?" She took a step back, her voice quaking slightly. "Yes, but with it being here, I do not understand how it came to be in such a place," she stammered. "I was at the tea table. I left it upstairs, perhaps a careless oversight." Her alibi seemed solid, yet Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in her voice. Was it fear or guilt? The mood in the room shifted, with the realization that the handkerchief could implicate Lady Denby in more than mere sloppiness. "Who else could have been here at the time?" Craven pressed, scanning the group. "Any lingering resentments towards Sir Reginald might provide motive." Colonel Bramwell cleared his throat, his eyes darting sharply between Lady Denby and Miss Marple, unease etched on his face. Reginald was known for his dramatic flair, perhaps a bit too much so. He threatened to reveal unfortunate truths about certain villagers. Some may not have been so keen on having their pasts troubled, shall we say? Intrigued, Miss Marple leaned in. "Ah, the dark secrets of the past. How deliciously irresistible." She felt the anticipation crackling in the air. Here were the threads she needed to explore further. Each guest was a potential keeper of old grudges, willing to go to drastic lengths to protect their privacy. Just as she pondered this verification of motive, a soft sound caught her attention, the creaking of the staircase overhead. Miss Marple turned, eyes gleaming. An unsettling thought simmered beneath her composure. She stepped away from the group, intent on discovering the source of the noise. The unsettling realization that someone else might be lurking in the shadows ignited a spark of apprehension. As Miss Marple ascended the staircase, her instincts prickled. Each step resonated in the stillness. At the landing, a faint voice flitted through the air. She paused, straining to hear. Quiet conversation, or perhaps the whispered plotting of a secret. She dared not move closer, fingertips brushing against the plaster wall as she reached the upper landing. Just before her eyes could adjust to the dimness, a shadow flitted past a flickering candle. Panic surged. Adrenaline surged through her. Was it the murderer, or a warning of something more harrowing still? In a rush, Miss Marple descended the staircase, bursting back into the library, breathless and brimming with urgency. Someone was up there. They could provide the information we desperately need. Gasps echoed through the group as they stirred, confusion mingling with terror. Craven's brow furrowed deeper. Who? What did you see? Something. She struggled to articulate her fleeting glimpse. A silhouette. The key to unraveling this web may lie in the shadows. And as she spoke, the unmistakable jingle of keys echoed from the wall behind her. A sound that sent a frigid wave of dread down her spine. Her eyes darted, filled with anticipation, awaiting the next heartbeat of the mystery yet to unravel beneath the staircase and the secrets it kept.